Okay, thank you, Jerry. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here with you. And as Jerry laid out the ground rules, I'll be speaking for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time to entertain your questions. You could also post questions at the chat link at the bottom of your screen. But at the end of the lecture, then Jerry will sort of moderate, and when you raise your hand, she'll call on you. So the topic that I'll be addressing today is the anti-Semitism behind white supremacy. So as I'm sure you are all aware, in recent years, the Jewish community in America has been shaken by attacks on synagogues in Pittsburgh, Poway, and most recently in Colleyville, Texas. In addition, there's been a historic rise in other anti-Semitic incidents and online attacks. So this is a chart from the ADL showing the number of anti-Semitic incidents from 2011 to 2020. And as you can see, there has been a dramatic rise in these anti-Semitic incidents. In fact, according to the ADL, more than 2,000 anti-Semitic hate crimes were reported in 2020, and that is the third highest year on record. Now, some of the rise in anti-Semitism is related to the Arab-Israeli dispute, as when outdoor diners in Los Angeles were physically attacked by a group carrying Palestinian flags. That happened several months ago. Also, anti-Semitism has resulted because of statements from public figures who have normalized anti-Semitic tropes, such as when Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene likened coronavirus masking measures to the Holocaust, or when Representative Paul Gosar invited Holocaust deniers to his fundraising event. But a major factor in the rise of anti-Semitism and hate crimes directed against Jews has been the rapid spread of the white supremacist movement in this country. Specialists who study extremist movements argue that anti-Semitism is the core ideology that fuels white nationalism. So this presentation will examine the reasons why anti-Semitism is so crucial to white supremacy in America today, and the threat that white nationalism poses to the Jewish community in America. So a central premise of white nationalist ideology is that whites are a biologically defined people, separate and distinct from Jews. That is to say that, according to the ideology of white supremacy, Jews are not white. Rather, Jews represent a threat to the white ethno-state that white nationalists hope to establish in America. Now, when we talk about Jews and race, I'd like to go back to the controversy that erupted when Whoopi Goldberg claimed that race had nothing to do with the Holocaust. She said that the genocide was about man's inhumanity to man. She was sort of framing it as a white-on-white crime. Now, her comments justifiably drew a storm of criticism because the attempted destruction of European Jews by Nazi Germany was all about race. Nazi science promoted the idea that the Aryan race, the figure on the left, was superior to the alleged inferior Jewish race, the figure on the right, and that the Jewish race, according to Nazi pseudoscientists, they said the Jewish race threatened the purity of the master race. And in the white nationalist imagination, Jews represent a race that presents an existential threat to whiteness. Now, this cartoon is from a book in Nazi Germany called The Poison Mushroom. And it was a textbook that was used in elementary school to depict Jews as a threat to white Aryans. And you can see from this cartoon that the stereotypical Jewish character is trying to lure this supposedly white Aryan woman into some nefarious, behavior. And so, according to Nazi racial pseudoscientists, Jews were an enemy race that had to be exposed, that had to be defeated, and that had to be ultimately eliminated. And that is how white supremacists in America today look upon Jews, as intelligent, but also as loathsome parasites who control and manipulate the actions of non-white people to the advantage of Jews and to the detriment of the white race. Now, that is a mouthful, so I will break that down. But before we do, to many people, the idea of a Jewish race is totally absurd. In fact, anthropologists, biologists, and geneticists today no longer even believe in the existence of races, at least not on the basis of physical characteristics. The fact is that the concept of race is really a social construction rather than a biological formulation. Now, some people might disagree. They would point out physical differences between whites and blacks and Asians. But I would ask those who would believe in the concept of race, what racial category would you place Latinos in, or people from the Middle East? The fact is that biological data shows that the DNA of any two human beings, no matter what their skin color, that the DNA of any two human beings is 99.9% identical. And that it scientifically validates the existence of a single biological human race. And so race is an idea, a concept that is really in the eyes of the beholder, rather than an absolute fact. But despite this, white nationalists in America today do not consider Jews to be white. They don't include Jews in their visions of a perfect white ethno-state that they would hope to establish in America. On the other hand, some on the left have condemned Jews because of their whiteness, that they say that because Jews are white, their skin color has bestowed privileges on them that are denied to people of color, which is why a proposed ethnic studies course in California originally did not include Jews. It focused on African Americans, on Latino Americans, on Asian Americans, on Native Americans, but not Jews, because it was claimed that Jews were white and therefore Jews were part of the majority. Well, that is something that I strongly disagree with, that if you're going to have an ethnic studies course in California, Jews deserve to be included along with other minority groups. Now, the debate over whether Jews are white or not is in itself ridiculous. because Jews come in all shapes, sizes, and skin colors. There are Black Jews and white Jews. There are European Jews and African Jews, and even some Asians are Jews. But it might surprise you to know that for much of American history, Jews were not considered white. Neither were Italians or many other immigrants, for that matter. Some native-born Americans even referred to the Irish as, quote, Negroes turned inside out. It wasn't until after World War II that Jews became vested as part of America's white mainstream. Nevertheless, the fiction that whites are racially distinct from Jews is crucial to the white supremacist movement in America today. Now, what exactly is white supremacy? Well, the Oxford Dictionary defines white supremacy as the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other racial or ethnic groups, in particular, Black or Jewish people. This idea is deeply rooted in European history and in American history. To white supremacists, American politics is a zero-sum game, meaning that white people win only when people of color lose. And if people of color gain rights, then that means white people are losing rights. And before the 1960s, Jim Crow laws supported and confirmed white supremacy. But then, in the 1960s, a Black-led social movement toppled the Jim Crow system. The civil rights legislation passed in the 1960s, which, by the way, Jews strongly supported, that civil rights legislation signaled an end to the Jim Crow era. And therefore, white supremacists considered that a loss for white people. But white supremacists found it hard to explain how they were losing out to what they claimed was an inferior race. They felt they were losing out to African Americans. As the Southern Poverty Law Center's Eric Ward stated, and by the way, Eric Ward is an African American scholar, he's explained how white supremacists rationalized their loss of power. And according to Eric Ward, he said, some secret cabal, some mythological power must be manipulating the social order behind the scenes, according to white supremacists. This diabolical evil must control television, banking, entertainment, education, and even Washington, D.C. It must be brainwashing white people, rendering them racially unconscious. So what is this arch nemesis of the white race, whose machinations have prevented the natural and inevitable imposition of white supremacy? It is, of course, the Jews. Now, again, this is not what Eric Ward believes, but he's saying this is what white supremacists believe. So Jews function for today's white nationalists as they have often functioned for anti-Semites throughout the centuries, as the demons stirring up an otherwise changing and heterogeneous pot of lesser evils. Now, not surprisingly, white supremacists identify Jews as the evil force thwarting their dreams of a white-only America. So why the Jews? Well, Jews have long served as the perfect scapegoat for whatever ails society. As Jews, they are by definition a people apart from a largely Christian world. Jews are very small in number in relation to the general population. But on the whole, Jews have been extremely successful and influential. Now, that doesn't mean that every Jew is successful, but on the whole, Jews have been successful. And throughout history, anti-Semites have always imagined the Jew as the embodiment of whatever they find repulsive. And so that's why, at times, Jews were condemned as evil bankers trying to control the world's finances. And at the same time, Jews have been seen as communists, seeking to overthrow the capitalist system. So if you don't like capitalism, then the Jew is the image of the capitalist. If you don't like communism, the Jew becomes the figure of communism. At times in history, Jews have been perceived as pathetically weak. This is a woodcut showing the stoning of a medieval Jew. The Jewish figure is impoverished. He's somewhat pathetic. But at other times, Jews have been portrayed as diabolically powerful. Nationalists blame Jews for being too cosmopolitan, while cosmopolitans accuse Jews of being more loyal to Israel than to the United States. So in the minds of white supremacists, Jews represent this mythological power that manipulates the social order behind the scenes. So this cartoon of a stereotypical Jew controlling other people, this is the way white supremacists and anti-Semites in general perceive Jews, as secretly working behind the scenes to control people to the advantage of Jews and to the disadvantage of the so-called white races. White nationalists try to frighten white people into believing that their safety and their livelihoods can only be protected if they define themselves in racial terms. And they warn that whites face racial annihilation as American families have become more multiracial, as America has grown more diverse, and as immigrants continue to flow into the United States. So here is a cartoon showing Uncle Sam being besieged by riffraff immigration. And as you can see in the cartoon, the immigrants who are coming in are generally non-white people. And so white supremacists argue that immigration is a threat to the white race. And white nationalists then say that whites must rise up to prevent what they say will be a white genocide if immigration continues. And once the white revolutionary spirit awakens, they say, they will then take down the federal government. They will remove Jews and people of color, and they will build an all-white Aryan country reserved only for white people. So the recent rise in anti-Semitism and the rise in hate crimes against Asians and efforts to suppress the Black vote, all of that attests to the staying power of white supremacy. Now, hatred towards Jews crystallized in August of 2017, when hundreds of far-right extremists descended on Charlottesville, Virginia, ostensibly to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee from a local park. It was dubbed the Unite the Right rally because it was supposed to gather all right-wing extremist movements It was the largest and most violent public assembly of white supremacists in this country in decades. It drew far-right extremists from at least 30 states, and some even from Canada, Sweden, and South Africa. And they represented almost every segment of the white supremacist movement, including neo-Nazis, members of the Ku Klux Klan, and Christian identity adherents. Also present in Charlottesville were armed paramilitary groups connected to the anti-government militia movement. In the nighttime parade, they carried tiki torches and flags with swastikas and other Nazi symbols, and they chanted, "Jews will not replace us." And then the rally turned violent when a self-identified white supremacist, James Alex Fields, deliberately rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer and injuring 35 other people. Now, most of the white supremacist groups and individuals who attended the Unite the Right rally, they still remain active today. And the ADL reports that most of the attendees considered that weekend a significant and unifying moment for the white supremacist movement. So what does the phrase, "Jews will not replace us," mean? That chant is based on an accusation that Jews encourage the immigration of non-whites in order to replace the white majority population in America. It's part of what white supremacists refer to as the Great Replacement Theory, a theory that states that welcoming immigration policies, particularly those that invite non-white immigrants, are part of a plot that is designed to replace the political power and the culture of white people living in Western countries. And that Jews are behind this movement to invite non-white immigrants. So this supposed Jewish conspiracy is really only the latest iteration of manufactured accusations that have been hurled against Jews throughout history. In the early Middle Ages, Jews were accused of using Christian blood for Jewish religious rituals. One version of what became known as this blood libel was that during Passover, Jews kidnapped Christian children to use Christian blood, get ready for this, to make matzah. Anyone familiar with matzah would find it hard to believe that blood is one of the ingredients. But this blood libel was a particularly vicious conspiracy theory because it invited violence against Jews for centuries. And it continues to be echoed in parts of the Middle East today. Then in the 14th century, Jews were accused of purposely spreading the Black Death, the bubonic plague, by poisoning wells. Now, part of the origin of this conspiracy theory was that Jews died in fewer numbers than Gentiles during the Black Death. And that may have been because of kosher dietary laws, where, according to kosher laws, animals have to be cleansed in a way that non-Jews did not clean their food before eating. And because rumors spread that Jews poisoned wells that brought on the Black Death, that incited the massacre of thousands of Jews in 14th century Europe. And early in the 20th century, a series of forged documents called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion accused Jews of plotting to take over the world. The belief that Jews represent a threat to the world order was exported in the late 1800s to the United States with racial theories that focused on the role of Jews in undermining traditional society. And today you can find a host of conspiracy theories on the internet that accuse Jews of everything from creating the lethal, supposedly lethal COVID vaccines, to Marjorie Taylor Greene's claim that California wildfires were ignited by a space laser controlled by a Jewish cabal. And so the chant that Jews will not replace us is yet another such conspiracy theory, but one that intertwines anti-Semitism with anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States. Now, although America has been known as a nation of immigrants, as a beacon to the tired and poor, inviting people into America, that is only part of the story. Xenophobia, fear of foreigners, also runs deep in the history of this nation, as we can see from these cartoons. So America has not always been welcoming to immigrants. In colonial America, Benjamin Franklin decried the impact of German newcomers to the colony of Pennsylvania. Franklin claimed that they would become so numerous as to Germanize us. Thomas Jefferson complained that immigrants would turn the nation into, quote, a heterogeneous, incoherent, distracted mass. In the mid-19th century, Irish immigrants were attacked in Philadelphia and other cities, and an anti-immigrant political party arose. It was called the American Party, also known as the Know Nothing Party, and that came about in the 1850s. By the second half of the 19th century, anti-immigrant feelings became infused with notions of white supremacy. Social Darwinists and eugenicists proclaimed the superiority of the so-called Anglo-Saxon race, and they denigrated Jews and Irish and Italians and other immigrants. Social Darwinists and eugenicists warned that America was being flooded by inferior races coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. President Teddy Roosevelt was particularly concerned about the, quote, evil effects of unrestricted immigration. He warned that Anglo-Saxons risk committing race suicide through liberal immigration policies. And that's a prime reason why Teddy Roosevelt's statue in front of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City is currently being dismantled. Among those influential figures who sought to preserve a pure white race, uncontaminated by so-called foreign blood, was a eugenicist by the name of Madison Grant, who in 1916 wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race. And this book warned about the possible extinction of the white race. Grant argued that what he called the Nordic race, which is a term for Anglo-Saxons, that the Nordic race was biologically and culturally superior to all other races, and that it was only the Nordic people who were responsible for all human achievement and for all human progress. Madison Grant sounded the alarm that an influx of people of inferior races would lead to the degeneration and ultimate collapse of civilization. And he was particularly offended by Jews, whom he said manipulate the ignorant working masses, whether alpine, underman, or colored. So by blending Nordic and Anglo-Saxon supremacy with fear-mongering, Madison Grant supplied a scholarly veneer for notions that many racist whites already wanted to believe, that the Anglo-Saxon or Nordic race was superior, that other races represent a threat to the superior races. And his thesis found eager converts among the American elite, thanks in no small part to his extensive social connections. And so the New York Times and the magazine The Nation were among the many media outlets that echoed Madison Grant's reasoning. His philosophical framework found new life among extremists in America today, and in former President Trump's stated preference for Scandinavian immigrants over those from Latin America or Africa or shithole nations. All of this provides background to what has become known as the Great Replacement Theory. Now, it actually originated in Europe in the late 19th century by French nationalists who warned that native white Europeans were being replaced in their countries by non-white immigrants coming in from Africa and the Middle East, and that the result of this will be the extinction of the white race. Now, white supremacists cite a 1973 novel called The Camp of the Saints by a French writer, Jean Raspail. And this book depicts darker-skinned immigrants as an existential threat to whites in America and in Europe. The book is about an invasion of refugees from India who land on the coast of France. And when the French military loses its nerve and refuses to massacre these immigrants coming in from India, that leads to a total collapse of Western civilization, according to the author. Steve Bannon has said that The Camps of the Saints is his favorite book. It's been translated into English and has served as a central text for white supremacists ever since its publication in 1973. The Great Replacement philosophy was quickly adopted and promoted by white supremacists in the United States because it fit into their conspiracy theory about the impending destruction of the white race. And it's also a strong echo of the white supremacist rallying cry, known as the 14 words. What are these 14 words? Quote, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children." Those are the 14 words that is the most popular slogan among white supremacists. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. The replacement theory became associated with anti-Semitism, since many white supremacists in the United States blame Jews for the influx of non-white immigrants. And so the chant, "Jews will not replace us," at the Charlottesville rally has had tragic consequences. In October of 2018, a white supremacist, Robert Bowers, killed 11 people at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after writing a social media post blaming Jews for bringing non-white immigrants and refugees into the United States. And at the time that he attacked the synagogue, there was a sign outside the synagogue about welcoming refugees into America. In March 2019, another white supremacist, Brenton Tarrant, live streamed himself killing 51 people at 2 mosques in New Zealand. And he released a manifesto online calling the Great Replacement as the motivation for his killings. The next month, Another white supremacist, John Earnest, killed one person and injured three others at a synagogue in Poway, California. And he released a letter online claiming that Jews were responsible for the genocide of white Europeans. And in August of 2019, white supremacist Patrick Cruces opened fire at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, killing 23 people, wounding almost 24. And he wrote a manifesto in which he talked about a Hispanic invasion, and he made reference to the Great Replacement. Those subscribing to the Great Replacement theory insist that Jews control the federal government through an international conspiracy. That, once again, Jews are the great puppet masters who, in league, in alliance with people of color, are engaged in some nefarious plot to destroy white Christian civilization. And they claim that Jews merely pretend to be white in order to infiltrate and bring down the white race. So for white nationalists, Jews are the driving force of a movement to dispossess white people. And that's why racists in Charlottesville chanted, "Jews will not replace us." And today, the Great Replacement theory feeds into white supremacist grievances, and it's magnified by politicians. Now, while in the past, such ideas came from the fringe of American politics, such as the Nativist Party of the 19th century, that is the Know Nothing Party, that was an anti-immigrant party. But today, political pundits and activists on the right openly embrace and echo such fears of replacement, such as the former Congressman Stephen King, who once tweeted, "We can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies." And by media personalities such as Tucker Carlson, who complained that the Democratic Party is attempting to replace the current electorate with third world voters. And by Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who claimed that, quote, "an attempted cultural genocide was occurring in the United States and that the left wants to replace America." So these charges fan the flames that immigrants represent a threat to democracy, which implies that the United States should be a white Christian nation only. This issue has come up recently in regards to Haitian immigration, for example. So the Great Replacement is yet just another conspiracy theory accusing Jews of undermining America. This past December, in a University of Massachusetts Amherst survey, it found that 2/3 of Republicans, 66%, agreed that the growth of the number of immigrants to the United States means that America is in danger of losing its culture and identity. And the same percentage of Republicans, 66%, are convinced that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate with voters from poorer countries around the world. Now, the Bible for white nationalists in this country is a book written in 1978 called the Turner Diaries. It was written by a white supremacist, William Pierce, and published under a pseudonym, Andrew McDonald. Pierce was a former physics professor who was a follower of George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party. The Turner Diaries is an apocalyptic tale of Jews who in the near future will have brought Blacks and other undesirables to dominate the American government. It describes a society that has completely deteriorated because of the powerlessness of its white citizens in a country dominated by Jews African Americans, and other minorities. But then the book describes a white revolutionary army that strikes back, that wages a war using nuclear weapons to destroy New York and Israel in an attempt to kill every Jew on earth. And a group of white supremacists then attacks the Capitol in an effort to overthrow the US government. The book claims if white nations of the world had not allowed themselves to become subject to the Jew, to Jewish ideas, to the Jewish spirit, this war would not be necessary. And then the book offers the following genocidal threat. The people had finally had their fill of the Jews and their tricks. If the organization survives this contest, no Jew will, anywhere. And so this violently anti-Semitic and racist novel has achieved a cult status among far-right extremists. It's been held up as a blueprint for how to foment a violent insurrection. And in fact, it has inspired more than 200 murders in at least 40 terrorist attacks, including the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the single deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. Timothy McVeigh's destruction of the federal building replicated the bombing of an FBI building that was detailed in the Turner Diaries. And when McVeigh was arrested, they found pages from the Turner Diaries in his car. And witnesses at his trial confirmed that McVeigh was fascinated by the book and that he had recommended it to friends. The Turner Diaries inspired the assassination of an outspoken Jewish radio host, Alan Berg, in Denver in 1984. It also motivated an attack on a Jewish community center in Los Angeles in 1999 by Buford Furrow, who remarked that his actions were a wake-up call to America to kill Jews. And in 2014, at the age of 73, Frazier Glenn Miller Jr., a notorious American white supremacist, he praised the Turner Diaries, and he shot and killed 3 people at a Jewish community center in Overland Park, Kansas. The book remains popular online, where it's available for free. It's also on social media and in militant chat rooms on sites like 4chan and Telegram and Stormfront. Now, former President Trump energized white nationalists with his rhetoric and through his staffing and policy choices. Following the white nationalist violence at Charlottesville, Trump infamously claimed that there was some very fine people on both sides. His rhetoric about shithole countries and Mexican rapists gave license to extremists to express feelings that were once considered socially unacceptable, but now have been normalized and mainstreamed. His claim that America was being invaded by immigrants parroted the same grievances expressed by Madison Grant a century ago. And Trump's bemoaning of why we no longer have immigrants coming from countries like Norway echoed Grant's preference for the Nordic race. Trump also echoed early eugenicists when he boasted of his good genes and high IQ. His appointment of white nationalists such as Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon helped shape an immigration policy that sought to ban Muslims and to separate families at the border. And although Trump removed Bannon as chief strategist and senior counselor, he and Bannon remain allied to each other. Trump's election clearly activated the white racist fringe, sparking a record number of anti-Semitic incidents in 2017 during his first year in office. But despite the increasing threat of almost unprecedented far-right extremism during Trump's presidency, Trump ordered major cuts in the domestic terrorism division of the Department of Homeland Security. And according to the ADL, hate crimes against Jews nearly doubled during the 4 years of the Trump presidency. The insurrectionists who attacked the Capitol on January 6th waved the Confederate flag. They wore white nationalist paraphernalia, including an Auschwitz concentration camp shirt. They showed America that they fundamentally believed in maintaining white supremacy. And Trump, in expressing his love for the very special people who stormed the Capitol, those were his words, only reaffirmed his allegiance to those advocating white power. Now, the fact that Trump's son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner, is Jewish, and that Stephen Miller is also Jewish, that should not in itself be of comfort. After all, there were Jews who worked for Hitler and blacks who served in the Confederate Army. So, in conclusion, Jews and all Americans should be concerned over the rise in hate crimes that has been sweeping the nation. Based on 2019 FBI data, Jews were 2.6 times more likely than blacks to be victims of hate crimes. Jews were 2.2 times more likely than Muslims to be victims of hate crimes in America. In 2019, the ADL logged more anti-Semitic incidents than it had tracked in any year in the past 4 decades. And that's the reason why the CEO of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, entitled his recent book, "It Could Happen Here." Just a few weeks ago, a Jewish man was attacked at a neo-Nazi rally in Orlando, Florida, where members of the National Socialist Movement carried signs reading, "No more Jews," and "Jews aren't white," and "It's okay to be anti-Semitic." In 2020, Jews in America were the target of 58% of all religiously motivated hate crimes in the United States. Now, prosecuting such offenses has not been easy. To make their activities less visible, since the early 1980s, the white power movement has adopted the concept of leaderless resistance, by which members could work in common purpose without direct communications from any organizational leaders. And so the violence they commit were seen as lone wolf attacks. And here's a graph showing the number of lone wolf attacks in the United States, and you can see the dramatic increase since the 1990s. But because they are seen as lone wolf attacks, the white supremacist organizations have not been prosecuted. Instead, individuals have been prosecuted. And the internet only adds to the vitriol. Social media is a super spreader of anti-Semitism, where algorithms are engineered to promote and reward extremist messages. Since the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old in Wisconsin who was acquitted of killing 2 people, since then, anti-Semitism has exploded on far-right websites and chat links like Stormfront. And these far-right websites claim that the Jewish-owned media has maligned Rittenhouse. Now, hate is very corrosive. It erodes democracy. And in any possible future civil strife, there's little doubt that Jews will once again be caught in the crosshairs. But that doesn't mean that white supremacy will triumph in this country. There are some encouraging signs. Jews have proven quite resilient over the past centuries. Even though 1/3 of the entire Jewish population was murdered during the Holocaust, Jews have not only survived, but they have flourished since World War II. And Jews have weathered the challenge of a world that is growing increasingly extremist. But the fact that the Ku Klux Klan has seen a dramatic decline in membership illustrates that white supremacy is in some ways on the decline. And Trump's defeat in 2020 is another encouraging sign. And the violence at the Charlottesville rally resulted in a backlash against white supremacist groups in the United States. While the organizers intended for the rally to unite far-right groups, the backlash led to infighting between alt-right leaders and a decline in membership in the white supremacist movement. And the court has awarded damages of some $26 million against the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville. And the recent conviction of 3 whites who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia by an almost all-white jury, that has dealt a stinging blow to white supremacy. Nevertheless, we are living in perilous times when democratic norms are being shattered by right-wing authoritarian regimes around the world, and when our own democracy is under assault from extremism, from conspiracy theories. And so we must all be vigilant, and we must all respond to hate crimes, whomever the victim is, whether it be Jews, Asians, Latinos, or African Americans. But Jews in particular should be vigilant concerning white supremacy, because the ideology of white supremacy is built on anti-Semitism. Okay,